Smelly cat? No. So last week I promised Mary and a cute baby Jesus, and they kind of show up this week. Not really. This is the best you're going to get in Matthew, actually. Because Matthew starts today's gospel by saying the birth of the Jesus, the Messiah, took place in this way. But there wasn't actually a birth, right? We didn't skip it. It wasn't there. There's not really that much about the actual birth in Matthew. That's why on Christmas we usually read Luke, because it actually has a story about the baby and the sheep and the shepherds and all that. Luke tells more of a tale, while Matthew focuses on Jesus' origin and the incarnation more than the actual birth. And while Luke tells the tale from Mary's perspective, traveling to get registered and giving birth in a manger, Matthew tells us Joseph's side of the story, which is a side that isn't told in Luke or anywhere else, actually. And this is very interesting because Joseph is kind of a non-entity in the rest of the gospel stories. He is around when Jesus is born, and then he's in the story where Jesus leaves his parents to go teach in the temple and they can't find him. But then we don't hear about him ever again. So we don't know what happened to him. Maybe he passed away when Jesus was young, because we know that Mary traveled with Jesus when he was preaching. Or maybe he stayed home. We don't know. Either way, though, Joseph gets kind of passed over. This part of Jesus' life, he gets pushed aside. So I'm going to explore a little bit of Joseph's story today. We hear that Joseph is a righteous man. Now this means that he is an observant Jew and he follows all of the Torah laws to the letter. So when Mary comes to him and says, "I'm pregnant, but don't worry, God's the father," he was a bit skeptical. We see that in the story today. In his mind, his betrothed has been with another man. And people would be betrothed to each other contractually, usually by their parents. And when this contract was made, they were basically already married. They just didn't live together yet, usually about a year. So the only choices here from the law that Joseph followed would be a quiet divorce or a public stoning for Mary. Now, both of these options were legal and considered appropriate punishment. But Matthew says he doesn't want to have Mary stoned, so he's going to choose divorce, which would probably mean death anyway, because she would be shunned into poverty. So you can imagine what Joseph was feeling, right? Maybe betrayal, anger, confusion, disappointment, but he still had some compassion for Mary. He didn't want her to be publicly shamed. And Mary probably had all the same feelings, right? So this wasn't a very good situation. But luckily the angel appears to Joseph and smooths everything over. And it is all good and well. But not really, because they still had to live in a society, right? Even though Joseph believes the angel that the Holy Spirit impregnated Mary, other people probably are not going to. And back then, honor and reputation were your lifeblood. So by Joseph still marrying Mary, he has to experience this same societal shame of having this baby that isn't his. And it wasn't just a personal thing, it was a public thing. It could result in a shunning or people refusing to do business with him or speak to them even. It was a big consequence back then. So this young family was in for a very long and hard road, even before they had to flee King Herod and go to Egypt and hide. So I tell you all of this not to make you depressed about Christmas, but to remind you that we tend to forget that these were real people, right? It was so long ago. David Lowes explains, because Mary and Joseph aren't merely characters from stained glass windows, but flesh and blood people. And the more we can imagine them as people like us, with ups and downs in their relationships, for instance, the more we might imagine ourselves to be people like them. That is, people who go through all kinds of things, some quite damaging, and yet whom God uses nevertheless to accomplish God's purposes. So Mary and Joseph were a real couple, faced with real problems. And Joseph didn't have to accept Mary and Jesus. He could have completely, legally cast her off and married someone else, and he still would have been considered a righteous man. And that would have been the easy thing. But he didn't. He believed God was with them, as Isaiah says, Emmanuel, or Yehoshua, Joshua, which is Jesus' real name. Sorry, everyone named Jesus. Jesus in Latin. It means Yahweh is salvation. Now, this is the point of Christmas, though. God came in Jesus to be one of us and to be with us. This is the promise of God in Christmas time. And this is why Matthew focuses on this part of the story. God comes to us through an ordinary couple in the world to help ordinary people in the world. And God comes through a normal birth to bring freedom from sin, fear, and death, and bring us into a rebirth of children of God. And this is quite a lot for just a short little text that we have. So as we're gearing up for Christmas, this last reading in Advent asks us to wait just a little bit longer before we party. It's a good news, bad news situation for Joseph, like a lot of things in life, right? The good news is God is coming into the world through your wife. That's great. The bad news is this is going to complicate things quite a lot for you. And that happens in our lives. Good news, you won the Powerball, right? Bad news, this is going to complicate your life quite a bit. Life is unpredictable, and we all have ups and downs, even Mary and Joseph. And the thing is that we need the good news of Christ in order to face the bad news of life. And there are many times in life when we have to make choices, sometimes easy ones and sometimes hard ones. So we should remember Joseph in these times. He had a very tough choice to make, and it was only tough for him because he was a good man. If he were a lesser man, would not thought twice about just casting Mary off. He was in his legal rights, but it wasn't the right thing to do. Joseph instead was open to God in his life, and he decided to look for God and accept God into his family, even though it wasn't the easy way. Now on Tuesday, and even later at the pageant today, we're going to hear the familiar story of the birth of Christ from Luke. Now until then, hold on a couple more days to finish up a strong Advent. We like the beauty of the version of Luke, but now we are still pondering Joseph and Mary, a young couple at an impasse. A very young couple, for Mary anyway, very young. What were they thinking and feeling before the birth of Jesus? How hard was it for them to accept God in their lives? What would have happened if they had not done so? That's a big one. And how can we as followers of Christ keep accepting God into our lives? And how can we share that with the world? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.